In today's world, it's getting harder and harder to start families. As young adults, we face pressure from our parents to get married and produce grandkids to continue our family lines. It doesn't seem to be as easy for young folks to do this anymore. The cost of living is rising, and if families manage to overcome the financial aspect, there's always the biological one. Due to genetic conditions and environmental contamination, many folks have troubles getting pregnant naturally. With the availability of birth controls and sexual education, people are deferring the choice to have children to later in life, and these later ages affect success as well. Due to declining birth rates, we're seeing more fear and social pressures coming out of the communities, influencing the laws around abortion. People start telling you what you should be doing with your body and your own children for fear of the dying out of the human race. On today's episode of the Musings of Rin, I'm going to talk about infertility. Socially, women typically bear the stigma of fertility even though their male partners have a share in this. Genetically, both partners may have mutations or abnormalities which might affect success in pregnancy. I'll start by looking at the female side of the reproduction cycle because most of the mechanics of pregnancy actually occurs in their bodies. The reproductive cycle of a woman is called the menstruation cycle. It lasts 28 days on average. It starts on the first day of your last period and ends on the first day of your next one. During this cycle, your hormone balances are changing to signal what actions your body should be taking next. Most women ovulate at the middle of their cycle on day 14. Ovulation is the release of an egg cell from the ovary. It travels down the fallopian tubes and enters the uterus. The uterus wall is lined with an endometrium layer. Think of it like a bunch of cells gathering resources in the body to support a pregnancy. If a pregnancy does not occur, the body sheds this layer along with blood and mucus that makes up the period you see leaving the body every month. If fertilization occurs in the egg, it tries to implant itself in the uterine wall and starts releasing signal hormones to say, hey, I'm pregnant. This hormone is called human chorionic gonadotrophin, or HCG. This signal causes the body to maintain that layer instead of shed it. It'll get converted later into the placenta that forms around a baby. It also tells the body to keep producing progesterone and estrogen to maintain the state of pregnancy. If there isn't enough hormonal activity in the body, you don't have a period at all. The endometrium layer does not build up. This is what we start to see during menopause. Menopause is that period at the end of your fertility cycle when you're too old to have children anymore. So as you can see in the female body, there are many moving parts that could break down. There's the signal hormones that manage the reproductive cycle or notify the body of a pregnancy. There's the egg cells and their ability to be fertilized. There's the structural pathway the egg travels through that needs to provide an environment where the egg and sperm can meet. And finally, there's that endometrium layer that joins the body to the fertilized egg that needs to be able to provide the resources to support a pregnancy. Let's start with the hormones. The part of your brain called the hypothalamus releases a hormone called GnRH. This causes the pituitary gland to secrete two more hormones called follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, and luteinizing hormone, LH. Between day 6 and 14, FSH causes one of your ovaries to mature an egg inside of a fluid sac. Around day 14, the LH hormone signals the egg's release, and the fluid sac shrinks and prepares itself for reuse. The most common infertility diagnoses in this hormonal category are anovulation, polycystic ovary syndrome, and hyperprolactinemia. Anovulation is basically not being able to release that egg, so perhaps the FSH and LH balances of hormones in your body aren't sufficient to do their jobs. Cysts may form from the fluid sacs building those eggs for release. If they don't release the egg, or they reseal themselves with the fluid still in them, polycystic ovary syndrome, or PCOS, occurs. These cysts might block other eggs from being successfully released. One way of diagnosing this has been to measure androgen levels. Androgens are sex hormones. The female body produces testosterone as well. Levels in the body help create puberty and physical maturity. It regulates hair growth, muscle mass, bone density, and sex drives. Too much of it, you might have more hair, stronger sex drives, and get more sexual satisfaction, but you might also have more infertility. This might be caused by high levels of LH in the body. Too much androgen might cause something called follicular dysplasia. Basically, this means only one follicle was supposed to be releasing that egg. It has to get to full size to do it. Dominant follicles suppress the development of smaller ones around it. So if too many of your follicles are being stimulated together, it might prevent the body from releasing an egg because no follicle was able to get to full size. Hyperprolactinemia is when women produce breast milk outside of a pregnancy. It's typically caused by a non-cancerous tumor in the pituitary gland. It increases the amount of prolactin hormone in the bloodstream, which tricks the body into thinking it's already pregnant, which might block other hormones from being released, which are needed to form a pregnancy. Okay, let's move on and look at the egg. Eggs are called oocytes. In order to be released, they have to mature. There are 11 phases that they go through during ovulation in order to mature properly. This process is called meiosis. 3 of these phases occur before ovulation, or the release of the egg from the follicle. Basically, the chromosomes condense and duplicate themselves. There are copies attached and called a sister chromatid. We have 2 copies of every chromosome, one from mom and one from dad, but eggs only need 1. So they line up to support chromosomal crossover between mom's 2 copies and dad's 2 copies. So we end up with 4 copies of a chromosome that's a little bit different than mom's and a little bit different than dad's original contribution. This is our new mom's contribution for the next generation. The process then stops and waits for ovulation. The next 6 phases occur after ovulation but before fertilization. After release, the nucleus breaks down and the new versions of the pairs move to opposite ends of the cell. The cell pinches and divides. So now we have 2 cells, each has half of the new chromosome pairs. So we've got 2 copies of our new mom's contribution, but they're a little bit different from one another. One of these copies is supposed to be prioritized and serve as the primary egg body. The other one is much smaller, but still attached to the cell. Meiosis halts again, waiting for fertilization. When a sperm cell injects its DNA into the dominant cell, sister chromatids from the new mom's DNA pull apart, and only one of the 2 copies remain behind with dad's contribution. Now we've got 3 cells because they move into their own smaller polar body. The dominant egg has 2 sets of chromosomes, one from new mom, one from new dad. The first polar body has 2 sets of chromosomes, both from new mom, but it was discarded after ovulation. And the second polar body has 1 copy that was discarded after fertilization. Now, before you joke about virgin births, no, the 2 rejected copies of new mom's chromosomes don't join together to form a new cell in a baby. They have to get fertilized. This is actually how you end up with twins or triplets. One theory is that the first polar body that was rejected also got fertilized to create a twin. Another possibility is that an additional egg was released when only one was supposed to be, and that got fertilized. After an egg has been fertilized, it starts dividing and traveling down the fallopian tube towards the uterus. It then tries to implant itself in the endometrium layer. So problems in fertility might occur when the DNA can't replicate or divide itself correctly to form these components between the phases. One problem in this area is called GV arrest. Basically, when the follicle releases that egg, it only goes through the first 3 stages. The oocyte doesn't wake up and prepare itself for fertilization. It's believed to be a problem with a signal hormone called maturation promoting factor. The next problem is called M1 arrest. When the chromosomes condense, it stops before the creation of the first polar body. It couldn't remove the second pair of mom's chromosomes. This is believed to be caused by problems in the cell components that perform that division. The next problem is called M2 arrest. It's ready to be fertilized, but structurally incapable. It couldn't separate out new mom's last redundant copy of those chromosomes. Dad's sperm has to be able to wake up the cell to finish the process. So there's a male fertility or partner compatibility issue here. If dad's signal can't bind to mom's receptor site, it won't continue. The last problem is sort of the catch-all. It's called mixed arrest. Basically, the process is stopped at any place other than those two expected blocking points. So you can see at a high level, an egg has to be able to successfully move through those phases to form that viable pregnancy. Otherwise, you have infertility. Let's say you ovulated, the egg was released. Now you need an environment or pathway where the egg and the sperm can meet and fertilize successfully. This is where we'll start touching on the male fertility. I'm sure many folks have heard of sperm counts. Most men release 15 to 200 million sperm per milliliter of semen. If their counts are lower than this, then they may have less success producing that one successful sperm needed to impregnate a woman. Sperm is produced in the testes. It travels from the testicles through the vas deferens, where it gets propelled out of the body by ejaculation of seminal fluids through the urethra. It then moves out of the penis into the female vagina. Low sperm counts could be caused by anatomical blockages in the testes or vas deferens. This is actually the theory of vasectomies as a sterilization method. The vas deferens is a tube which gets purposely cut and blocked to prevent the passage of sperm. Men still ejaculate seminal fluid and get that feeling of elation, but the sperm is blocked from leaving the body. They die and the body reabsorbs them. Bacterial infections could cause permanent damage to the production of sperm as well. Sexually transmitted infections like chlamydia and gonorrhea. Even E. coli is said to affect the production of sperm. Skin infections like leprosy, smallpox, syphilis could cause structural damage in this area as well and destroy tissues needed to produce that sperm. Another cause of damage to sperm production could be an overactive immune system. The male body attacks its own sperm, dropping the count. Okay, so I'm sure most people are familiar with the basic mechanics of sex. Males insert their penis into a woman's vagina and through friction stimulates ejaculation or the release of sperm into her body. I know, it's not very romantic a description, but bear with me. I'll try to make it clinical and not too awkward. Once the sperm is in the female body, it then starts culling it. It's basically going to be survival of the fittest. Sperm has to be able to travel through the vaginal passage, pass through the cervix to gain entry to the uterus. Then it has to swim up the correct fallopian tube to locate a released egg. It then has to inject itself into the egg, wake up the cell, and continue the fertilization process. Now, on average, the sperm can only live up to 5 days in a woman's body. They don't survive outside the body. Side note here, guys. No, withdrawing the penis during sex isn't an effective birth control method. This is because you're releasing small amounts of sperm that get released as precum for lubrication. You also can't release anywhere near the vaginal folds. You have to really miss, not one drop. If you have really industrious sperm and a fertile woman, you can still get pregnant just for releasing on her folds. Now, the vaginal canal is acidic. Semen is basic. It's believed only the strongest sperm survive the first 12 hours. If a woman is excessively lubricated, then some of the vaginal fluid might carry the sperm back out of the body in the wrong direction. If they reach the cervix, which is the passage between the vagina and the uterus, they then have to cross the cervical fluid barrier. Here they might be trapped by white blood cells and destroyed by the immune system because they're recognized as foreign invaders. They have to travel through this mucus, which is like a gooey trap that the least mobile sperm can't get through. After this point, the body starts becoming more habitable for sperm in the uterus. Some sperm simply run out of gas and stop moving somewhere along the path. Failed sperm get broken down and reabsorbed by the female body. Let's start at the beginning of the journey to see what could go wrong here. The vaginal pH level is typically between 3.8 and 5 for most of the woman's cycle. The body contains a normal amount of healthy bacteria in the vagina which prevent other harmful bacteria from taking hold. It helps to maintain the correct pH levels. The more acidic the vaginal fluid, the faster the sperm and any infections die off. The more basic it is, the more likely you can get other infections, including STIs. Remember, even failed sperm can carry sexually transmitted infections and diseases, so please make sure you are not infecting each other if you're having sex. These illnesses can destroy your fertility and your health down the line. You don't want to suffer like that. Now, during ovulation, the pH of the vaginal canal moves to between 7 and 14. That's basically when sperm can survive more easily. Healthy semen pH level is around 7.2 and 8. Menstrual blood also raises the pH level of the vagina because it's got a pH level of 7.4. The idea behind this changing pH level is you only want to allow the sperm into the body when there's an egg there to be fertilized. You shorten this window of time to prevent other infections from taking hold. More vaginal wetness could be caused by higher levels of estrogen. This arousal creates more lubrication for safer sex and allows deeper penetration to take the sperm closer to its goal near the being released at the cervix. But it also might carry the sperm back out of the body if there's too much of it. At the cervix, the female body must be able to produce cervical fluid for the sperm to transfer into the uterus. It has to be non-acidic to serve as that bridge that it can cross. If the mucus is too sticky, then the sperm have to work harder to push through it. If men are producing sperm that have poor mobility, you might not be able to pass the cervix. The female's immune system has to allow the passage for some of the sperm into the body. It can't be overactive, and it can't cull all of it. To be successful at this point, sperm have to be the proper shape. They can't be misformed with incorrect shaped heads or incorrect shaped tails. Mobility and ability to bind and pass through this area is important. Some cancers and infections cause cell growths in the cervical wall or block the passage through narrowing or closing of it. These growths could be cancerous or benign, and it could be caused due to infections or genetic mutations. Another cause of infertility is fallopian tube blockages. It prevents the egg and sperm from meeting successfully at the end of its journey. Causes could be endometriosis, which is tissue that builds up in the lining of the uterus, being present outside of that region. So if you've got this tissue in the intestines, the fallopian tubes, the ovaries, any connecting tissues, it might produce period matter that moves through and blocks those tubes. It could be caused by STIs or infections, so bacteria growing and sitting in the way. It could be caused by ruptured appendixes, inflammation, surgery, or scar tissues, so swelling of the tissue or blocking that passage. It could be caused by an ectopic pregnancy, so if you've had a former pregnancy where it didn't move to the uterus, it stayed in the fallopian tube, it sort of ruptured the tube and healed incorrectly. It could also be caused by cancers and polyps, so genetic disorders. Once a healthy egg is released in the woman's body, it takes about 24 hours to move through that unblocked fallopian tube to the uterus. So if it's not fertilized within that period, it gets destroyed, basically. So sperm has to be in the body waiting for the egg or catching it moving down the fallopian tube before destruction in order to create pregnancy. The fluid released with the egg from the follicle in the fallopian tube is thought to signal the sperm to its presence or attract it. So the lack of that fluid being released with the egg might make it harder to get pregnant as well. So if we look back to that 28-day menstruation cycle of a woman, you start to get an idea of which times you're more likely to get pregnant and which times you're not. If you do not want to be pregnant, then the best times to be having sex is immediately before and after your period. If you do want to be pregnant, the best time to be having sex is immediately before or during your ovulation. At the end of its journey, the sperm has to bind to the egg surface. It has to release enzymes to break through that outer layer and bind to the protein receptors inside, inject its nucleus, and signal the egg to wake up. This reaction of releasing enzymes is called an acrosomal reaction. If it occurs too far away from the egg, the sperm dies before it can fertilize it. It won't pass the surface. Some drugs have been known to cause this to happen prematurely. Drugs like Viagra have been linked to this issue as well. Once the egg is fertilized, it needs to reach the uterus and embed itself in the endometrial layer. If there are chromosomal defects in the embryo, problems with the lining, hormonal imbalances to maintain that pregnancy, then it may not implant successfully. Eating disorders or improper nutrition, high stress levels, lack of sleep, might also reduce the body's ability to implant successfully. Long-term usage of contraceptives might prevent the buildup of the endometrium layer as well, because that's how they basically work. They replace the hormonal levels to trick your body into thinking it's already pregnant. If you've altered this path for a long period of time, your body forgets how to produce the normal levels. It produces what's normal to it. So in some cases, the body can't come off contraceptives. This is basically why many birth control pills are too mild. They're trying to prevent permanently damaging female fertility, which unfortunately makes them less effective. You can still get pregnant on the pill quite often. That's how most people do it. If you are serious about looking at birth control, condoms are the more effective blocker to the path of sperm in fertilizing the egg. If the sperm doesn't enter the female body at all, you don't get pregnant. It's also a barrier from bacteria, so you can't transmit bacteria from the female body to the male body and vice versa. So it protects you from STIs. So after implantation, you still have to carry the baby to term, which is generally a 9 to 10 month phase. So after implantation, you are still subject to miscarriages. This is when the body basically ejects the embryo, like a period, before it can survive on its own. It's usually in the first 20 weeks of a pregnancy. The leading cause of a miscarriage is the body detecting a genetic abnormality with the fetus. Now, this doesn't happen with all genetic abnormalities, but the body does have the power or ability to detect some of them. Other causes of miscarriages include infections, drugs or chemicals ingested, structural abnormalities with the uterus itself, diseases like thyroid disease, kidney disease, and diabetes, age, radiation, malnutrition. You'll notice that some of those diseases I mentioned surround the ability to provide nutrients and energy throughout the body. So that's part of the reason why malnutrition and those diseases are both impacting the pregnancy. You have to be able to get resources to your baby to build the new human being. In today's environment, the very water that we drink has so many chemicals in it. Industries are, dumping waste into our water supplies, and our advanced water filtration systems do what they can, but they can't filter out all of the particles that are there. The smallest ones, which are the hardest to filter out, are hormones. And if they get into our body, they can trick our body into thinking it's in the wrong state, which might block pregnancy. People who consume Viagra, transgendered folks doing hormone replacements, or birth control pills basically shed those ingested hormones that are excess in their systems back into our water supply via urinating into wastewaters. So, as a society, we're creating more situations for hormonal imbalances in our youth's development, which might cause an increase in infertility. People are choosing to avoid pregnancy. They're choosing to get boners when they're too old for them. They're choosing to circumvent their own genders. And by doing so, they're poisoning other people's and are removing their choice. Now, many people also get pregnant accidentally. They aren't being careful, they're not educated, or they're being forced into sex against their will. Many of these people don't have the finances to support another life. Pregnancies require the ability for women to eat increased amounts of food because they're trying to gather resources to build a human being. Sometimes this cost is too much for the family who wasn't planning to have a child. Because the body naturally miscarries in that first trimester, as a society, many countries, at least in the Western world, accept planned abortions in the same period of time for the folks not wanting to be pregnant. Many people think at this time the fetus doesn't have an awareness, that they're building a shell for this new life that has to go through a quality assurance test, that the body will decide whether it needs to be aborted or continue on. So before this period of time, there's no problem removing an unwanted pregnancy. It would protect the community and the family from increased costs. Some religious communities frown on abortions, though. They apply pressure on society and the family members to try and support these unwanted children. They don't want any life being destroyed. Now, governments try to weigh the costs between the ethics and financial feasibilities of this. Depending on how an abortion is done, it might hurt a woman's chance at getting pregnant again in the future. They don't want to sterilize their population. So they have to be able to provide methods that are safe for women to use. They have to determine, are these families actually able to support these costs of the children? Or will the cost of raising them be dumped on the community? Can the community afford to support these children? In some parts of the United States, they're trying to overturn laws and force women to apply for abortions. Only children with identified birth defects are being granted permission to abort. This phenomenon has occurred due to the global propagandas and fears of lowered birth rates. Folks think that because that rate has declined so much, oh my God, our human race is dying out and we're all becoming infertile and we have to ensure our children are born to preserve our races. We're starting to try to take your rights away because you were the one who was able to get pregnant, so you got to do this job for us. Honestly, I believe this fear is coming from a lack of understanding in what is actually dropping the birth rates. In the Western world, it isn't actually due to infertility, at least not directly. The reason for our declining birth rates is the lack of financial confidence to have a family. With increasing immigration and increasing overpopulation, it becomes very hard to find a job. The availability of good-paying jobs is reduced. Because the cost of living rises, it takes longer for those who do have work to save the money they need to purchase a home. People want their own homes because their parents don't want them moving a partner or having kids on their dime. They don't want to be financially responsible for their child's family. So we're waiting longer and longer and longer to create families. When people age, their bodies break down over time. They could develop structural problems, get infections, have hormonal imbalances due to environmental contaminations. The older people trying to have kids are, the more they find they have problems with infertility. So, simply put, the longer we wait, the harder it is. Younger people have more successful pregnancies. Those that take the chance of having children without finances run the risk of living in poverty, unable to support children. The fear of not being able to find jobs or losing those jobs or not having enough money to support a child means many of them do not want to take the risk on of having a child. They don't want to live in overcrowded households. They don't want to run out of money to feed themselves. They want to enjoy some of the luxuries like, nice clothing, eating out, seeing shows, having games. They don't want to be kicked out of their parents' household if they're dependent on their parents for housing. They don't want to dump children onto the communities because this is just going to cause increases in taxes and make everything cost more. So overall, it's just not worth having children. So overall, this is what is dropping our birth rates. Those young people need to have jobs. They need financial security to have the confidence to create families. So now we circle back to the big questions. What is less ethical, having an abortion or forcing someone to have a child? Is it ethical to take away someone's choice at controlling their own financial stability? Is it ethical to dump unwanted children on the communities and raise and higher taxes? They didn't choose to have those children. Is it ethical to force the globe to deal with angry, unwanted orphan migrants? I mean, they're forcing their ways into other countries that don't actually have the resources to support them. They want to support their own communities. What do you think? Do you want children? Are you afraid of infertility? Are you afraid of overpopulation and immigration? Is lowered birth rates normal? Is it a natural result of world overpopulation? Anyway, I think I'll stop there for today's episode. Until next time.